Hey class, I wanted to create this video to kind of give you some ideas and to review rhetorical strategies, or in this case, a rhetorical analysis. So the book for this week is Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. And I thought I'd go ahead and read the synopsis. So A Man's Search for Meaning is a 1946 book by Viktor Frankl, chronicling his experiences as a prisoner in Nazi concentration camps during World War II, and describing his psychotherapeutic method, which involved identifying a purpose in life to feel positive about, and then immersively imagining that outcome. So I'm just going to stop right there. So it seems with Frankl, right, happiness has a lot to do with the individual, right? The individual kind of has control. All right. So according to Frankl, the way a prisoner imagined the future affected his longevity. This book intends to answer the question, how was everyday life in a concentration camp reflected in the mind of the average prisoner? Part 1 constitutes Frankl's analysis of his experiences in the concentration camps, while Part 2 introduces his ideas of meaning and his theory called logotherapy. So let's go into that. Logotherapy. Frankl believed that humans are motivated by something called a will to meaning, which equates to a desire to find meaning in life. He argued that life can have meaning even in the most miserable of circumstances, and that the motivation for living comes from finding that meaning. Taking it a step further, Frankl wrote, "Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances." All right. So stopping there, now we're getting into some of his main claims that we would want to see how he proves those in the book. All right. Core properties. Frankl believed in 3 core properties on which his theory and therapy were based. 1, each person has a healthy core. 2, one's primary focus is to enlighten others to their own internal resources and provide the tools to use their inner core. And 3, life offers purpose and meaning, but does not promise fulfillment or happiness. So that's interesting. All right, finding meaning. Going a step further, logotherapy proposes that meaning in life can be discovered in 3 ways: by creating a work or doing a deed. So kind of like altruistic maybe, by experiencing something or encountering someone, by the attitude that we take toward unavoidable suffering. All right. So this week we start something called a rhetorical analysis, right? So basically all that is we, right, the reader, we are looking at how the writer supports other ideas, their claims, other argument, right? So we're going to look at the modes of persuasion: ethos, pathos, and logos, right? That rhetorical triangle. Their thesis, the way that the writer chooses, how the writer chooses how to organize his or her material. What kinds of evidence do they use? And the style. So style, what sentence structure, what kinds of sentences? Is there like a lot of figurative language, right? Simile, metaphor, repetition, all that stuff. All right. So, again, right, the rhetorical triangle: ethos, pathos, and logos. Pathos is focusing on the emotional appeal. Let's see. The ethos is more about what does the writer do to establish credibility, right? Trust. And logos is how do they support it, right? Are they using logic? All right. So this is a question taken from the discussion. Did you notice the modes of persuasion? So I have an example here of pathos, right? So let's take a look. This is on page 65, 66. "We who lived in concentration camps can remember the men who walked through the huts, comforting mothers, giving away their piece of bread. They may have been few in number, but they offer sufficient proof that everything can be taken from a man but one thing: the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. Little typo there. Okay, so this does support the idea that we just talked about right here. Where was that at? Right here, right? Everything can be taken away from man but one thing, to choose one's attitude. And he's supporting that here with pathos, right? So these people, right, these prisoners were willing to still give up what they could, right? Men who walked through the huts, comforting others, giving away their piece of bread, right? So even though they may have been starving, right, despite other circumstances, and it kind of tugs at our heartstrings a little bit, right? So that's where the pathos comes in. So in a way, it's kind of a combo, pathos and logos, but mostly pathos, right? So they were still willing to give up what they could, all right? And it does support the idea that the Nazis couldn't take away their freedom of thought, the prisoners, no matter how, no matter what the conditions were, okay? So there's one example. Figurative language, right? Metaphor, simile, an oxymoron, hyperbole. There's all kinds. Here's an example of both, I think, a metaphor and an allusion, okay? And here, Frankel's talking about this Dr. J guy, the mass murderer of Steinhoff, right? Says, the only man I have ever encountered in my whole life whom I would dare to call Mephistophelian, being a satanic figure. All right. So on one hand, it's a metaphor because it's a direct comparison, right? This Dr. J is being compared to this demon or a devil, but it is also an allusion. So a lot of times writers do this, right? They will make reference to other classical works. So here, Frankel is making reference to a play by Christopher Marlowe, I believe. I read it years ago. Dr. Faustus. Okay? So there's two things there. Now, in order to understand, right, the allusion, you kind of have to know what it's about. Okay, so this Mephistophelius guy from the play, right? Dr. Faustus is a smart person, right? But he's a book smart. He decides that he studied all he could, but he still wants more. So then he turns to a black magic, right? So again, this play was written like maybe in the 1600s, right? So heavy Christian influence here. So Faustus summons this devil guy, Mephistophelius, and he basically sells his soul, right, for knowledge. So there's like a parable there. But anyway, so to call this guy a Mephistophelian is really, really bad. All right. So taking a look at style and tone, here's an example. When describing his life in the concentration camp, he gives us very vivid details, right? Right here. He recalls a time when we stumbled on in the darkness over big stones and through large puddles, right? So you'll notice, especially in part one, right, when he's telling us the story a lot, right? He's trying to paint the picture. He uses a lot of a description. And the tone, right? Here's an example. Our greatest freedom is our freedom to choose our attitude. His tone seems kind of optimistic, uplifting. So this is just a quick example. I hope it helps.